Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jody Spencer, and I am joining Christy Tupper today on our first In the Hot Seat episode, a brand new production on the PPN network. Thank you, Paul and Brent, for the opportunity to bring this show to the network. Christy, we have a great show planned today for the pilot. I'm so excited, very timely. But before we get into that, should we tell everybody kind of what the hot seat's about, what they could expect?
Might be a good idea. I mean, we could keep them guessing, but what's the fun in that, right?
Seriously, go ahead. Tell them what it's about.
All right. So every 2 weeks, we are going to be engaging with some industry experts and or customers for lively discussion, which is something we always have, debate, some discourse maybe, as we humanize the digital experience. All aspects of the customer lifecycle are up for discussion here, including education, awareness, acquisitions, impact, retention, as well as the technologies that we're using throughout each phase of these journeys, including CRM, marketing automation, support case management, logistics, supply chain. We've kind of got it all. We've got a dynamic show. We've got numerous hosts on our team. So we've got a great team backing us up, and you're not going to see our faces every time. Sometimes you'll see faces of the folks on our team. We're going to be rotating on each episode. So it's going to be like treasure hunting. You never know what you're going to get.
That is
Just
so
keep digging.
perfect, right? I mean, we wanted to keep it exciting so people keep coming back every 2 weeks, right? I mean,
That's right.
Different format, different hosts. You'll never be bored with the host. You'll never be bored with the topic. So
Let's
I'm
hope.
really, really excited about the show. And with that being said, I think we picked a good one for right now. I mean,
I think you're right.
Subscriptions are everywhere, right? And I mean, I was reading an article the other day in Forbes, and they were citing a study from UBS stating that by 2025, the subscription market is going to be $1.5 trillion. And, I read that and I thought, that is a staggering amount. But when you really break it down, subscriptions are everywhere, right? Razors, toothpaste, in addition to B2B software. I mean, you brought up the BMW heated seats the other day, and it was just mind-boggling.
Yeah, it kind of blew my mind. I'm watching TV and they're advertising for BMW, and all of a sudden, I guess there are countries where people, like here, we're used to just going and buying a car. And if you want a heated seat, it's a feature of the car. Well, that's not the same in other countries. So I guess apparently BMW is making heated seats a subscription so that if you only wanted heated seats in, I don't know, January and February, then that's all you pay for. I just thought that was wild, but I guess it shouldn't surprise us with the way Tesla upgrades their cars. But I just saw that and knew that we were going to be talking about this. And I thought, wow, that's just crazy.
I kind of wish you could do that with car payments, right? Only pay for the months you drive. But, today.
Imagine that during the pandemic.
Right? Today we have two great guests that are joining us today, very well versed in the topic. So before we bring Michael and Amy on, do you want to tell us who we have in the hot seat today?
You bet. Our first folks in the hot seat, we've got Michael Fawcett. Michael is an experienced high-tech leader, advisor, board member, software industry analyst, all-around great guy. We have a good time talking with Michael. He's a thought leader and published author on emerging trends in business software, digital transformation, digital first, and customer experience strategies and technologies. Michael's the founder, CEO, and chief analyst at Arian Research. He's former chief research officer and now advisor to unicorn startup G2 and board chairman at LocatorX. His career includes executive roles at 5 venture-backed startups, analyst firm IDC, and 7 software vendors, including PeopleSoft and Autodesk. Would you like to introduce Amy?
Absolutely. Amy Konary has more than 20 years of experience with business model innovation. She's the founder and the chair of the Subscribed Institute. Many of you may be familiar with that. It's a think tank for the subscription economy. Through the Subscribed Institute, Amy brings together a community of business executives, thought leaders, and industry experts at a series of executive summits and events, and generates research and industry benchmarks on subscription transformation topics. Amy also advises Zuora customers on recurring revenue strategy development, monetization, and business model maturity. So 2 very well-versed experts on this subject. Let's bring them on and hear what they have to say about subscriptions. Michael, Amy, welcome.
Thanks for joining, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us.
Okay, all those accomplishments, That is a mouthful. we have two very well accomplished experts. I'm just going to sit back and let you guys run with the show, okay? Because this is such a hot topic right now. I don't know if you heard back when you were in the green room while we were talking, but the market value in 2025, right? $1.5 trillion. I mean, that is just staggering. And I think it'll be helpful to really start with an understanding and kind of the background on this shift to subscription from where everyone was at. You know, what happened? What brought us to where we are today?
That's a good question. No.
Yeah. And Michael, I feel like you and I are both going to be, have similar passion about some of these topics. So why don't you take this one first, and I'll chime in, and then we can swap on and off.
Yeah, it's been it's certainly an interesting time, and Chrissy, I love your comment about the BMW hardware subscription. By the way, that's getting a ton of negative press and feedback right now. No, for the last, I don't know since the early 2000s, when software companies really started to move into this subscription-based model, I think all the way up till probably 2008, it was an experiment. And then in 2008, during the recession, an awful lot of companies realized the advantage of, going with an operating budget versus a capital budget. And you started to see a lot of money shift into subscription software. And then, of course, over the last several years, that's moved into all kinds of things from a consumer standpoint and from a business standpoint. And, to the point of, now you have companies that are selling hardware like a tractor, for example, John Deere, that has a bunch of software features and functions that you can upgrade by subscription, and even subscribe to the hardware with the software upgrade. So it's gone into almost everything that you see around you, from my toothbrush and toothpaste to some feature in my car, I guess. Although I think I'm just going to buy the hardware with the hot seat, but that's another thing.
Yeah, I kind of like my hot seats on demand.
Exactly.
Well, and Michael, I think, some of the examples you gave in the BMW one as well, one of the things that has shifted, because of course the idea of subscriptions, if you think about newspapers and media, I mean, these have been around for hundreds of years, certainly longer than, than all of us have been probably paying close attention. But what's been different since, say, 2000 to today is really the digital transformation and the opportunity to have a digital conduit for a relationship with an end customer. So I think of the modern subscription as really the monetization of relationships in a way. Those relationships are built around an outcome. What is the promise that I'm going to help you achieve? And that's what you pay the subscription around. And then I think on the customer side, on all of us as consumers, whether we're in our home lives or in our business lives, I think there's this desire now to pay much more closely with what we're actually doing or using. You can obviously take that to the extreme. I think heated seats is probably on one end of a continuum for sure. But then there are other ways of personalizing services where we as consumers of these services can see a value proposition that's unique to us. Maybe we're still paying, a per month type of a subscription, which I think is the most traditional way of monetizing a subscription offering that there is. But we have an experience that's tailored to us. And I think the one that we probably all have experiences with on that end would be, streaming some of the content that we might stream on our homes for entertainment, the way that that's personalized. In addition to business software and the difference of what I might see when I log into a system versus what a colleague might see when they log into a system, and how that's different. And the ability to do that all hinges on that digital conduit.
Amy, you brought up so many points that I want to dive into, right? Because the one thing that I try and wrap my head around and really think about is the customer experience related to subscription. You're right. You hit that right up in front, because it's the sell is very different today, right? On a subscribed service, be that to a consumer, be that to a business. there is so much happening in the back end before someone actually raises their hand and says, yep, I'm going to buy. Let me put down my credit card. Let me call and talk with a salesperson. As businesses, regardless of your audience, again, the B2C or B2B, you really have to think through that experience a little differently, right? I mean, you both created a study recently that shed light on some of the things that were important to people and what caused them to stay or leave or sign up for a service. I'd love to dig into some of that, some of your findings.
Yeah, it's an interesting shift, and I think part of the learning, and I mean, you and I were both at IDC at the time when when Salesforce really started to realize that hiring a bunch of transactional salespeople and treating customers in a transactional way didn't work in the subscription world, and started to realize that it was a relationship, it was an ongoing relationship, and metrics changed and the way you thought about it changed and culture changed, and I mean over time I think the idea of subscriber experience it's a subset of customer experience, certainly, but it is something that I think looking at as in a holistic way is important. And I just did a survey that Jody, you mentioned, that dug into and tried to find out, what influences people to buy, what are they looking for, what self-service do they want, self-service for everything, etc. So I think it's an important topic, and it's one that you're starting to hear more and more about. And I know, Amy, I know your folks in the Subscribed Institute have been talking about and writing about that for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have such a high bar for what we expect on an experiential perspective from the providers that we interact with. And just a little bit of background on what I do, which will help with the next comment. So Zuora is a software company, and I know it's hard to say. Zuora is how it's spelled, but we're a SaaS cloud company. And what we offer is actually a platform for companies that have recurring revenue as part of their business to help them do everything from order to pricing and packaging to revenue. A lot of the experience, actually, if you raise your hand and say, what's your favorite subscription? What's your least favorite subscription? Usually the least favorite subscription, there are things that would come up like, I don't like how it's priced, or it's hard to cancel, a lot of things around pricing and packaging. So a lot of what our tools do is help companies figure out how to price and package their subscriptions in a way that's going to create good value for the customers, and the output would be retention and growth. And what we find in many cases, that the idea of allowing the customer to be in charge of their own journey with you. So that journey might start with a free trial, that might start with a limited use pilot, that then might go into some sort of a tiered offering, which then might include a pay-per-use offering. Over time, that is so important with subscriptions and subscription experiences, because the old way of simply giving the customer, if you think of the software industry, let me sell them as much as I possibly can up front and hope that they figure out how to use it over time. That's not the way the software industry works anymore. And as more and more industries move to these models, they are shifting their value proposition to customers in similar ways, which is, as opposed to, let me see how much I can sell you, it's let's go on a journey with you where I can deliver you personalized value that gets better over time. And that's where you start to see those, really high value relationships start to take hold.
And that's where you really get into value selling and story selling. That's where that becomes so much hand in hand with that experience, because you're not just dumping a bunch of stuff in their lap. You're actually giving them a solution to a problem that they have.
Yeah. And I mean, this has led to all sorts of, new ways to think about what you're doing from a business perspective. I mean, things like free trials and tiers of free offerings to get people used to and engaged in finding value, or even product-led growth type go-to-market models, where that's really the way you get your customers, rather than just focusing on one segment. You open this up with a much broader lens, and you have a free use model of some sort, whether it's a trial or a tier or whatever, that gets people into and using and understanding the value. And that's from a customer's perspective, obviously that's a great thing. It gives you the opportunity to see if this thing is going to deliver what it is you believe it'll do, but it also puts a ton of pressure on the back end of that, on the company that's that's offering this, because you have to know that you can deliver value immediately, and that it's recognizable value, and that it can lead to that growth of that relationship that hopefully gets them into some sort of a paid model, because it's not a charity, and it's not a it's a very different model from, I'm selling you this pin and it's it writes and hopefully it'll continue to do so, and now we're done and you don't see me anymore. It's you're going to see me every time you have to write that check every month or every year or whatever it is, right?
I was a little shocked when I read the survey results on what influenced people, right, to make that purchase with the free. I mean, I expected to see free trial as the number one thing. Where my mind was at, it's like free trial was the number one thing that people would expect in this type of journey. While it's still high on your list, it was intriguing to me that it was not the first thing, and I was wondering if you have any insight behind, why is free trial not so much of a driver?
So if you just do the straight up ranked order list, and I did the data in a couple different ways because I think it's an interesting one to try to dig into. But free trial actually did come up ahead of free tier, and I'll say I was a little surprised by that, frankly, because I sort of expected having a free tier. But I suspect, and Amy, I'd love to know your perspective on this too, but I suspect that the problem with free tier is that often customers don't get enough value out of the free tier. But for a free trial, it's access to almost everything, if not all the features. So you actually do establish up front that the value's there, and that'll lead you into influence you in making that purchase decision. Free tier is a tricky one because of packaging. You have to get the packaging right, or you're not going to deliver enough value to make them want to move to a paid tier.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think packaging is really difficult to get. Coming up with a compelling event that isn't artificial to get them to move off of free, because in most cases that's the objective, right? And if it's not the objective, then I wonder how much value you really can be offering in the free tier, as an example. So thinking about what does that journey look like, and one of the things that's nice about a free trial, and when I'm kind of giving advice, I will usually steer people towards that approach, is it gives a time frame to both the customer as well as to the provider to demonstrate that value. The clock starts ticking once they access that free trial. And so typically the provider will build, whether it's automated ways or, right product like growth right in the system, reminders, try to get people to make sure that they actually go and take and use and interact with whatever that service or product is during that time frame, because it's got an expiration date at some point. So I find those to be a lot more successful, not only because it, usually people who are going to sign up for a trial and know there's a window, they have a compelling reason to maybe buy the product at some point in time versus, I think I might hang out on free indefinitely, and it's just a lot harder to get those folks to move on to something that's paid.
Yeah, and I think that's it goes back to packaging again in that on the free tier piece of it, right? If I give you too much, then you're going to stay there and you're not really going to want to move. And I also think that sometimes when you think of free tier and the packaging around free tier, it's almost like you're taking a scarcity approach, like, oh, I only get to do a 40-minute video call and it cuts me off, or I only get a little bit of storage and I have to pay to get more. And it's the abundant mindset when it's a free trial, because you want them to see the value immediately from everything that's available. And so it's almost like it almost puts me in a different attitude, a different way to think about the company and the relationship. If I'm getting a lot of value really quickly versus I'm sort of operating in a scarcity way that is pressure on me to move.
So I'm curious, when you're engaging with customers and advising them in the pre-sales assessment side, especially with the larger prospects, what are some of those important aha moments that get them to a purchase decision, right? Are there specific drivers that organizations can think about when they're remapping that journey and getting someone to take the leap?
Yeah, that's the art and science, right? Of trying to, to give the, Zuora example again. So I'm the Subscribe Institute at Zuora. All of the benchmarks and data that we derive come off our own customers. So 1,000+ companies or so running their business anonymized aggregate basis, their own systems. So one of the things we personally do is to try to help companies engage with companies when there is actually a compelling event. We have a launch coming up, or we know that we have these goals to achieve within this particular time that are aligned with the outcome that our software can provide. I think as in B2B software, it's can be a really long sales cycle. And it's probably the case for many other. If the customer is semi-interested in what you're doing, but doesn't actually have a project in the near term. So I think the first thing is picking who you're having conversations with. The second thing is having a value conversation with them. And someone mentioned value selling early on. I think that's absolutely essential with these types of subscription businesses, whether you're B2B software or, no matter what is the value you're trying to achieve? What outcome? Are you looking for this? Are you looking for this? And then developing kind of a value promise around that. And then, obviously from a journey perspective, one of the things we found with the Institute is for subscription businesses, mature businesses, something like 70 to 80% of your revenue is going to come from existing customers. So there's something around acquisition for sure, but then, you want to acquire the customer at that right time, at that right level, so that there is that opportunity to retain and expand with that customer over time. One of the challenges I think early on with companies when they're getting going with these models, particularly if you're rooted in perhaps a traditional mindset, product mindset, is you're tempted to sell people too much at the start. And if they buy something that they can't consume or see value from in the defined period of time that you have within that contract, you're going to run into situations where you have either a downsell or a churn. A downsell is obviously better than a churn, but still rather have, growth
an upsell.
Time, an upsell, right? And so it's really a discipline within an organization to try to figure out, how do you not only find the right customers to talk to at the right time, but how do you make sure that you're overcoming the temptation to think, what's everything that I could possibly sell in this moment? Because that's sort of that traditional mindset. So what exactly does a customer need to achieve this outcome where I can prove that value? And then how will I know what the next step is and when to take it? That's so important.
One of the things that I've spent a good bit of time with over the last several years is looking at, and part of that was because of my time at G2 was really important. What do buyers actually want? And what I've seen over the several years of studies on buyers is that there's a real gap right now in a lot of organizations between what the sales team, the sellers think that the buyer wants and what the buyer actually tells me they want. And what do they trust, and where do they go look for information, and how do they want to buy? And I did a report for a client not long ago, and the Brevet Group put out this survey that they had done, and 13% of the survey respondents said that they believed the salesperson understood their needs. 13%.
Wow.
Yeah, ouch.
That's a lot of missed target there.
Well, it is, and so and then the other one that I love, the other stat from this is that in my survey, 67% of the respondents said that they only contacted a vendor salesperson after they'd made a decision. That's a problem too.
That's a huge problem.
And so my point with this is that, your buyers are not buying necessarily the way you think they are. And they're certainly looking for information from trusted sources that are outside of your control, right? They Google things, they go to peer review sites like G2, and they trust their peers way more than they trust the salesperson that's trying to deal with them. So that whole shift into relationship, it can feed into this shift. But you have to actually know that that's what you're trying to do. It's not, it's a different way to get in front of that customer, and you're adding value from the beginning of the relationship. And that's one of the things, Amy, that I think your team does really well in that pre-sales arena, is having a team that actually goes in the pre-sale world and adds value immediately from helping that customer figure out a strategy. How am I going to do this? How do I launch this product? How do I do MVPs? How do I use the system? And do I need self-serve? All those questions that you deliver value really quickly, then you can change that dynamic and show that in fact you do understand their needs and you're willing to listen and make sure that you're meeting their needs and that you can interact in that way. So I think that there's a big shift there that kind of feeds into this whole subscription shift, and it also means that as a seller you have to think about things considerably differently.
It was interesting when you talked about, at the point someone's picking up the phone and calling to talk to a salesperson, they've already made their decision, right? And I was reading some really interesting statistics on that self-service model and when someone's actually going to throw down a credit card. And I was astonished to read, and I believe it was in a one of the reports online that I was reading, talking about enterprises that they were surveying. And where companies' thresholds were for allowing individuals to make purchases on credit cards, right? We think of that historically, if it's a very large dollar value, right? They're picking up the phone, you're cutting a check back and forth. And this particular study was mentioning that 70% of companies were now saying you can go ahead and contact, or you can go ahead and make a purchase without a sales rep involvement at 50,000 or less. That's 70%. But the more astonishing number to me was that 27% were saying that it was okay to do that without contacting a sales rep for purchases to $500,000. Right? That totally changes that conversation on what you need to think about. Amy, you keep referring to the customer journey, right? That customer journey now has to be completely re-architected, right? Because usually you think about it linear, A to B. This now becomes A to Z, all the way down to A, and then B to A, and I mean it's so complex that at the core, right? Tell me if I'm wrong, but at the core of every single step, now you have to ask yourself, it's all about that customer satisfaction and getting them to renew. Right? They have to be happy at every single engagement in your journey, and I think that that's a little bit of a challenge because it's not the rep who necessarily maintains that relationship. They are interacting with multiple different departments in an organization now, and at times, not even a department, just forward-facing web and content and review sites. So it's more of a challenge now for organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jody, I'm getting stressed out listening to you talk because that's really.
I'm stressing myself out talking.
This has become a support session. Like, yes, it really is like that. That's really hard. No, I think it is. There's lots of different things that have to work together. So many different customer-facing teams, customer-facing opportunities. That experience, even sometimes is not as we don't understand. How people are building perceptions because it's in the eyes of the beholder, right? And how they're perceiving their personal journey with us. And it's difficult to do that, all of these things that you're saying at scale. I think if you had the luxury of every single one of these companies gets a superstar customer success manager who knows how to, push all the buttons and pull all the levers in the organization and knows the product inside and out and knows how to get the support team on the phone and can speak 70 different languages and then everything would be fine. But of course, that's not the reality in every business and in any business rather. And so I think it's a combination of doing all of those things at scale. But the upside of all of that, so if you think there are 3 levers of growth in any subscription business, of course, acquisition, but then also retention and growth. When you have economic situations like the one that we find ourselves in right now, where you might have a slowdown in subscriber acquisition, which is something that we're observing at scale across the companies that we maintain in our index, you have 2 other growth levers at your disposal. So one of the things that we've seen companies improve from 2022 as compared to even before the pandemic, 2019, is their ability to retain and their ability to grow. And we're still exploring, what is it? Why are they improving average revenue per account over that time? Why are they doing such a better job at retention? I think there's probably several different factors at play here. But I guess the punchline is, if you are able to do these things, then you have an enduring business that's much less susceptible to, a lot of the stresses that we've seen in the last several years for businesses.
And that's before you even get to things like engagement and advocacy, right?
Right.
It'd be interesting to measure the impact of not just, an engaged customer, but then one that goes out and advocates to other people on your behalf.
That's right. That's right.
Well, aside from, obviously, economic conditions are a huge factor right now, and obviously driving decisions in terms of renewal rates. What are some of the other drivers that you see that cause the subscriber fatigue? Both from a B2B and a B2C. I don't know if they're two different buckets that cause, two different reasons for the unsubscribe, or if there's a generalized similarity between the two groups.
Yeah, I guess one of the things I can say is we saw a lot of demand because these services, many of them are digital. We saw a lot of increased demand during the pandemic because of the situation that people found themselves in, being, unable to leave their homes or the shift to working from home. And so we saw a ton of subscriber acquisition that might have happened over 3 or 4 years. It was all compressed, within an 18-month window. And there are only so many people in the world. And, with reliable access, networks, et cetera, to access a lot of these services and find value from them, I think. And as people are moving back into the world, their behaviors might change. I know mine certainly have, from the pandemic. And you might assess, okay, I'm doing things a little bit differently now. Do I still want to be entertained in this way? Do I still want to get food services in this way? Do I still want my, children to consume these educational apps in the way that they have before? And so I think part of it is kind of those unnatural conditions that were caused by the pandemic that people are reassessing. So and I think certainly, now we have economic stresses that are playing a role too. And so people, are really, and this is why when we talk to companies through the Institute, value. I'm not giving up the subscription services that I know I'm seeing value from. Clear is a customer of Zuora. I don't know how many of you know Clear. They're at the airports. I had been a customer from before the pandemic when I traveled a ton. Of course, March 2020, my travel ground to a halt. But I really had seen so much value from using Clear that I didn't want them to go out of business. Basically, I was like, they're going to keep my subscription because I'm going to single-handedly make sure that they're there when I travel again. But what they allowed me to do was to, rather than cancel my subscription and lose that relationship, they allowed me to pause my subscription for a period of several months. Yeah. And so by doing that, it was a really smart move on their part. They were able to keep that relationship with me. And when I started to travel again, I resumed that subscription. And I actually have since then, I've added my husband onto the subscription because now we're traveling more as a family. So I think for the smart companies, again, who can figure out how to retain and then how to grow subscribers, no matter what the condition, and they do that around that life cycle. It's an ongoing relationship with the customer, and that might mean that customer needs to pause for a period of time, or maybe they need to go to a lower tier for a period of time. But knowing, I do that in a transparent and self-service, easy to manage way, I'm going to maintain that relationship.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I thought was really interesting to watch at the beginning of the pandemic. The companies that actually did adjust really quickly to be able to operate in that model. And I did Clear exactly the same way, but then on a different note, my go in-flight Wi-Fi, I just canceled that. So it's it depends on the value you're getting back. And the other thing from the standpoint of keeping the relationship, but also even in moving to why did they upgrade, or why did they move to paid? In my survey, that was one of the things. The number 4 answer was support the vendor's business. Like, if you get value, you're willing to understand that there needs to be a way for that business to be sustained, or I'm not going to get that, you're not going to be able to stay in business. So I'm willing to go further in that than I would if I didn't feel like that relationship was something I wanted to continue, wanted to sustain. So I think that's really important. And giving customers the option, particularly self-service option, to manage that and step down a tier or step out for 6 months or whatever it might be. I think it's really important.
Do you see the, obviously the stickiness from a B2C side is one level. On the B2B side, I think there's a couple more complexities that come into play, right? Because when you engage in a subscription service for example, most CRMs now are subscription, and you go in and you set up all of your workflows and you have your database. I mean, it's not as easy. Yes, you could cancel and go to a new service. It's not a flip of a switch like if I were changing toothpaste, right? So I think there's a little bit more of a stickiness value on a B2B side. And I'm curious, do you see the same satisfaction drivers on B2B that you see on B2C, since they can't switch as easily?
Well, I think the satisfaction drivers are similar, but I think the problem is, or the difference is that unraveling a relationship when it's a very complex process, it's culturally something that would be difficult for you to do as a business. You may make a different decision, and that even varies depending on what that SaaS product is, for example, because there are certainly some SaaS products that it's simple enough, and I am willing to shift if you do something egregious in a relationship. I mean, I changed note-taking software in the middle of the pandemic because all of a sudden my note-taking software that I'd used for 14 years decided that they didn't get enough money from me and they were going to eliminate what I did and give me a new downgraded subscription, or I have to pay double. And I said, I'm not. I went to a different vendor because I could just export the notes and upload them, and it was easy, right? But at the same time, you unraveling your CRM system, your Salesforce automation system, your billing system, whatever it might be, that's ingrained in your business process. And, that's the fallacy of, oh, well, it's just easy to cancel the subscription. It is, but it's not easy from the aftermath of what you did, because of the fact that it's become so ingrained in the way you do business, the way you go to market, the way you operate. And that, that increases stickiness, but it also increases the pressure on the vendor to deliver that experience and continue to deliver that experience. Right?
And I would say the market expectations for enterprise software on net revenue retention expects that, right? Net revenue retention, you obviously want it to be 100%. If you're an enterprise software, you want it to be close to 120%. Lower than that is off the after. And any other, B2C, there's no way, 120% net revenue retention over time would be almost impossible to achieve. So that stickiness is sort of built in the expectations, of companies that are looking at and evaluating from a market perspective, these enterprise SaaS companies. I think the other element too is that a lot of these relationships are contracted, and customers have gotten very savvy because subscriptions and sort of, IT have been around for a good number of time, and thinking, well, if I negotiate a 3-year contract, I'm going to get a better X, Y, and Z. And so a lot of times it's 3 years or whatever that window might be. It's usually at least 1 year, probably a longer period of time. Those are actually associated with higher retention numbers for obvious reasons. You're holding on to those relationships for a period of time because you need to, use those services in order to operate your business. You're training people on them. You've got processes built around them as well. So they're not as easy to give up. But that just also means that the companies that run those services have a much higher bar to achieve as far as not only holding on to those customers when the renewals do come up, but growing those relationships over time, in a way that's going to help them deliver on, what the street's looking for.
Amy, as you were talking, I just had a thought that this entire conversation, it's been primarily about, at a base, an organization that grew up doing subscription or started out doing subscription. But it just occurred to me, I mean, there's a very large subset of the audience, right, who historically has been a perpetual model. And now transitioning over to take advantage of, where everyone expects the market to be with subscription, that's a huge challenge, right? Because how do you move someone who is perpetual over to subscription? And those drivers look very different, right? From somebody who starts out with you at a subscription level and you can continue to add on. And I hadn't thought about that until just now as you were talking. That brings up another whole conversation
It's
almost.
a great
Too, right?
conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's what I've spent my career basically doing, is right in the middle of those transitions. And yeah, it is definitely a whole other conversation, lots and lots of issues. But I think that, for anyone in the audience who's listening, there is the really good thing for anyone trying to do it now in 2022 is you've got at least 20 years of experiences to draw from, the good, the bad, and the ugly, what to do, not what not to do, lots and lots of case studies and lessons learned. So you're not in the dark doing this the way that companies were, a lot earlier on in this transformation.
I was working with a client earlier this year that was more of a traditional model software company that was trying to launch a product-led growth PLG initiative. And the biggest issue for them, besides getting the packaging right and all the kind of technical things that you would expect, was the cultural shift internally. So it is such, and you would think by now, we've said this for how many years, but it is still really difficult to shift an organization from a transactional mindset to a recurring mindset. It's just very different. And if you don't address that level of change management when you're trying to launch, you're not going to be successful.
Yeah, I think one of the fundamental, I often will get the question of like, could you boil it down to one thing? And I will say the one thing is, what are you proud of? That seems to be the main difference. So companies that have made this transition are committing to it. They're proud of the outcomes that they drive for their customers. I help my customer achieve this. The companies that are far from the transition are typically proud of features, functions, more of an engineering mindset. And you need to have all of those things. But simply having all of those things does not help you build a relationship, enduring and valuable relationship with the customer around it. It's how those elements are applied to help the customer achieve the outcome. And then the customer achieving that and having that value realization, that's that cultural shift. And everyone in the company has to get around helping that customer achieve that objective. And it takes a while.
Yeah, there's a common theme here to what you're saying, right? It's all around solving a problem and more of an, from the company perspective, more of an external focus than an internal focus, right? All of this wonderful, cool stuff will come if you're really concerned about solving a problem for your customer.
Well, one of the questions I asked in the survey had to do with, have you canceled? And then why did you cancel? Why did you choose not to renew? And I thought it was interesting that the number one answer wasn't price, or it wasn't even poor customer service. It was the service didn't meet my needs. And that can fall into a bunch of different sort of narratives around that. But in the end, that is really the driver, right? This meets my needs. It serves what I want. It's value for the money I'm paying. I'm fine. It doesn't meet my needs, then I don't care if it is a great price, or I don't care if it is, whatever. It's that simple fact that it's not continuing to deliver value in whatever way that it didn't, and that's the reason that I canceled.
I am looking at my checklist of topics to make sure that we cover today, and I'm looking at the clock, right? We are up against the end of the clock and have so much more to talk about. So I am going to throw out now, Amy, Michael, I hope you will come back into the hot seat to get through, the other 10 bullets that we didn't even get to touch upon, because there's so much more to talk about. This has been eye-opening. There's a lot of things everyone needs to think about and keep in mind, right? Going to subscription. And before we wrap up, Michael, I think you just kind of talked about, your one point in which people really need to think about as they're going to embark or grow subscription, but feel free to, add on to that if you want. I was going to ask if both of you could just summarize, and for the audience members, if there's one thing that we could leave them with to say, you have to be thinking about this to be able to survive and grow in a subscription world, what is it?
I still go back to that stat, the 13% from the Brevet Group that said, 13% of salespeople understood my needs. If you understood the needs up front of the customer, the rest of these, the rest of this conversation, it just falls into place, right? It can make a lot of sense that, service meets my needs because the company understood my needs. The salesperson understood my needs as they went into this and made sure that they offered the packaging, the thing, that the product that would deliver value to me. So to me, that's one of the most important pieces of this, is that realization that you really do have to try to understand before you go any further down that road.
Yeah, and I'd add, I'll have a stat as well. I think that's a good way to close out. I mentioned earlier, 70 to 80% of a mature subscription company's revenue is going to come from existing customers. That's the proxy of, are you doing what Michael just said? Are you in fact delivering value? So it's fairly easy to acquire customers, and there are lots of examples of fail subscription services that sounded really interesting and cool, but they did not address a fundamental need that a customer had. They did not deliver value over time, et cetera. And if you can't retain your subscription customers and then grow those relationships, you are going to be DOA. And so that figuring out how to do that is all the crux. Yeah.
Excellent. This has been, as I said, this was great. Thank you both so much. That is all the time we have for today. And congratulations, Michael and Amy, you survived the hot seat. To those of you watching, if you think you have what it takes to be in the hot seat, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Drop a line in the comments section and we will be in touch. If you have what it takes, we'll put you right in that hot seat. That is your In the Hot Seat episode for today. I'm Jody Spencer.
And I'm Christy Tupper. Tune in next time for different faces, different topics, different perspectives as we put someone different in the hot seat. Thank you so much. Have a great day,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.